Hello students, today's video lecture is on the bony landmarks of the femur. Let's get started. So here's our notes page, and you can see we have all these parts of the femur that we're going to learn, and then also we'll talk about the patella or the kneecap. So I know it looks like a lot of terms for the femur, but I think that you will find that it's actually easier than you anticipate because we have a lot of repeating concepts from things that we've learned earlier in this unit on bone identification. So let's get these two out of the way, the femoral head and the femoral neck. Come down to our diagram. I don't think that there's any hesitation that this rounded part, and keep in mind, it should be rounded all the way. It's just kind of showing you it in place in the acetabulum of the coxal bone. That is the head of the femur. I'll put it here as well, and then I'll color that in just a second. And then the narrower section, this is the best example of a neck on a long bone that you can get. So here is the neck. If we go to the anatomy app and delete the three parts of the coxal bone, you'll get a better view of the roundness of the head of the femur. Okay, so your diagram kind of shows it to you in this aspect where it's in the acetabulum, but it does have that rounded head. The head of the femur would of course be covered in articular cartilage, as would the acetabulum, which is the socket portion. Okay, we've got similar ideas, similar setup to the humerus, where we have two large bumps. One is greater, one is lesser, so this greater one is the larger of the two. So let's go ahead and find those. The greater trochanter is one of the most notable bony landmarks in the entire body. And when we get a chance to look at the actual bone models, you will see how significant the greater trochanter is. It's so significant that it actually has its own epiphyseal plate. There's normally an epiphyseal plate over here in sort of the head-neck region, and then the greater trochanter has its own epiphyseal plate or growth plate. Very significant. The lesser trochanter is more on the posterior surface, so we see a hint of it here. We can really see it better on this side. Keep in mind, a lot of people will end up mispronouncing this because normally when we see a CH next to each other, it makes a ch sound. A lot of times, most of the time in anatomy, it makes a K sound. So greater trochanter, just like we learned trochlea or trachea, the CH makes a K sound. So lesser trochanter and greater trochanter. And I'm actually going to leave these uncolored because I want to put color on these two parts right here. So let's dissect the word. Inter, we know, will always and forever mean between. Between what, you ask? Well, here you go. Between the trochanters. Look at, we have a little bit of a different ending, so something is going to appear between the trochanters. Two different things, actually. Notice intertrochanteric. So we have a line and a crest. I'm going to go ahead and write up here that the line is on the anterior side, and it is much less significant. The crest is on the posterior side. So we're actually going to look, sort of draw a line between the greater and the lesser on both surfaces, anterior and posterior, and that's where we're going to find those markings. So I'm going to use blue for my intertrochanteric line on the anterior view. So there's going to be a roughened, sort of raised section of bone right here where I have the blue line. And I'll go ahead and label that in words as well. Kind of be very obvious about the line. And if we come over here to the posterior view, I'll show you an image in just a second. You'll be able to note how much different it is in size, in prominence. This is the intertrochanteric crest. So again, we'll draw a line between greater and lesser trochanters. I'm going to make this more prominent. And both of these, if we go ahead over to the anatomy app, I'm going to show you the skeleton without any ligaments removed. And if we zoom in on the hip, okay, we can't even see the head of the femur. Normally it would be, you know, neck. This would come in like this, and then the head would be sort of this rounded section right here. We can't see any of that because it's completely covered in ligaments that hold this joint together. So I got rid of the joint capsule and all the ligaments. But if you notice, let's take a look at this side. Those ligaments end right at the intertrochanteric line. And then on the back, the crest on this side. So if you take a look at this posterior surface, you can really see that this area here is a very prominent ridge, and then this is indented. On the front, again, we'll have to look at the actual models and then again at the real humerus, but there's going to be almost looks like a scar kind of section right through here. And that's where all of this ligament connection to the bone occurs. On this photograph, you can see the intertrochanteric line stretching between the greater and lesser trochanter. And then on this photo, the posterior surface, how much larger the crest is. Okay, so we've got those two. We're similar on the front than we are on the back, except the front has the line, the back has the crest, and a much better view of the lesser trochanter. So I'm going to make that really obvious there. Just a hint from the front. And now I'm going to go back and put in my greater trochanter so you can see the boundaries of that. It's going to be this whole chunk here and then here. Okay, so let's head down to the distal end. We've got condyles, we've got an intercondylar fossa, we've got epicondyles. Let's take a look. And actually, I think I'm going to go to the app first to show you. The femur is here. Later on, we'll learn about the tibia and the fibula, but right now we're concentrating on the femur. And I've removed the kneecap and all the ligaments. Let's look at the back. The femur has that typical sort of bone shape, like a dog bone shape or the, quintessential bone shape with these two lumpy, bumpy ends. Those are condyles. And so essentially, the end of the bone is divided into two condyles. Okay, those are the large bumps. It's often easier to point at them on the posterior surface because there is such a significant cutout here. So this is the condyle here and here. And then we can go ahead and associate a medial and a lateral with each one of those. So let's get our bearings. Zoom out a little bit. This is an anterior view, and this is a posterior view. So each one of these lumpy, bumpy ends is a condyle. If we're looking at a posterior view here, this way is lateral, this way is medial, proximal, distal. So this right here is the lateral condyle, which would make this one the medial condyle. Now, we had the same setup in the humerus, but if you remember, we didn't call them condyles. We called them specifically the capitulum and the trochlea. So I'm going to add a couple bits of color. Lateral condyle. Keep in mind, I really could transition that color to this side as well, because it's that whole chunk of bone there. And medial condyle. Condyle is a knuckle-shaped bump that forms a joint. I would definitely say that you probably can see why those are considered knuckle-shaped, and they form joints with the tibia. The tibia, by the way, is going to have the exact same setup. All right, so if those are condyles, then we can fill in quite a bit. Let me zoom in here. These smaller bumps upon the condyle, you may guess, are called the epicondyles. And epicondyles do not form joints. They are strictly for muscle or ligament attachment. So medial epicondyle and this smaller barely there, these are more appropriate for epicondyle size. The one on the humerus was just way large. So medial epicondyle here and here. Lateral epicondyle here and here. If you're wondering why this one is singular and this one is plural, it's because I made a typo. Fix that. There. All right, between the two, between the condyles. Intercondylar fossa we know is a scoopy spot. So let's find a scoopy spot between the condyles. Here we are, intercondylar fossa. Okay, that is a significant cutout. Again, we'll look at our app just to verify, give you a different viewpoint of it, intercondylar fossa. And again, this would be the medial condyle, lateral condyle, oops, excuse me, not epicondyle, condyle, lateral epicondyle, medial epicondyle. And there will be ligament attachment and joint capsule, etc. Okay, so we've got that taken care of. What is left on the list for femur? Patellar surface and Lenia Aspera. Okay, notice patellar surface is on the femur list. So it is this flat sort of area on the femur where the patella sits. And it's sort of caved in like a little nest. I always call it like a little nest. I'll just put location on femur for the patella. And the patella is the kneecap. So here's what's tricky about your diagram. I love it because it shows the patella, that's this, but that cartilaginous area behind it is actually the patellar surface. So let's go to our app. And on one side, I have the patella here. It's covered in ligament, which is why it looks a little weird. I have it here. On one side, I've deleted it. So this whole nice smooth area that the patella encounters as it moves around when we relax and contract our leg muscles, that's the patellar surface. And the bone itself that would sit there is the patella, okay, or kneecap. So D on your picture is the patella. And if we color carefully the area behind it, that would be the patellar surface. I'm going to embellish a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to label that as well. Okay, last but not least is this phenomenon called the Lenia Aspera. And this translates into rough line. Rough line, and it is exactly that. It is a rough line. It's on the posterior shaft of femur. We don't see it on the anterior shaft. So let's come down and see what we see. Here's the anterior side. There's nothing there. It's nice and smooth. So this is just the shaft of the femur. But if we take a look on the posterior surface, and my arrow kind of obstructs it, but there is a ridge that runs down the back side of the femur for muscle attachment. It is a significant site for muscle attachment. That is the Lenia Aspera. Rough line. And in terms of coloring, I'm just going to stretch this color down. It sort of fans out towards the bottom. That's something you'll definitely be able to see on the models when you come to class and look at them. So Lenia Aspera is a posterior only feature. Let's see how the app does with it. Need to turn it around, right, because the shaft in the front is just plain. I'm not holding out hope. They did okay. I know you probably don't see it, but this, since we're looking at a back view, there's a roughened raised ledge right along there, kind of like a crest, and that's where a lot of muscle attachment happens for the inner thigh and for the quadriceps group of the anterior thigh. Okay, let's finish up with our patella. The patella is the kneecap, and it has two parts. Now, we need to be really careful with this because we automatically assume the base is at the bottom, but that is the larger spot. The apex is the point, or like the peak. So that means this side, this pointy side, is the apex, and that faces distally on the kneecap, and this part up here is the base. So I'm just going to color code those two differently so you can kind of see. This upper section is the base, the larger area, and then this lower pointed part is the apex. So let's look at that in place and we can see that again. See, the bottom of the kneecap is quite pointed. Apex, and upper wider section is the base. So that is the patella in place. Letter D. And of course, we don't see it on the back. Instead, we have this very deep cutout called the intercondylar fossa. There you have it, the bony landmarks of the femur.